Well, hello there, fellow travelers. Thank you for joining me once again as this is the Unbroken Ground, episode number 22. We're going to continue just talking about Jesus and some of the things that he said. And today we're going to talk about the feeding of the 5,000, and the title will be "What Are the Odds?" And I'm just really going to go over, think through back some think through over some stories in the Bible where God does the impossible, and how we're to have that attitude when we approach life and when we do life, and how that fits into faith and what that means to be a follower of Jesus. So yeah, that's what we're going to talk about today. Again, if you have lots of any questions or lots of suggestions or fun things to say, you can always find me on my Facebook page, the facebook.com/the unbroken ground. Also, you can also email at theunbrokenground@gmail.com, or you can find me on Instagram under the Unbroken Ground. Great ways to send any thoughts or questions, and hope that you enjoy today as we continue to push in and try to follow Jesus more every day. So when you think about Jesus feeding the 5,000, one of the phrases in there that specifically when we're talking about Jesus feeding 5,000 in Matthew chapter 14, which is the main text that we'll be thinking about today, the phrase in there that just really sets my imagination on fire, just makes me really think about it, is what Jesus says when the disciples come to him. The disciples come to him and they say, Jesus, these people, send these people away. We're in this deserted place. There's no restaurants around. There's no food. Tell them to go away so they can go find something to eat. And Jesus looks at them and says, no, you don't need to tell them to go away. You feed them. And the disciples have counted the cost. Basically, they've taken inventory. They've counted the number of people that are there. They've counted the resources that they have. They know they don't have enough money for sure, and again they're out in this wilderness. Where would they get the food? They just had no clue. But they did have these 5 loaves and these 2 fish, and so they said, "Well, Jesus, how could we do this? All we have are these two fish and these 5 loaves of bread." And so, Jesus says, all right, we'll have the people sit down, and he blesses the food. And of course, the disciples begin to serve, and it doesn't run out. In fact, there's enough left over that there are baskets that are picked up. There are leftovers. And I think that I focus so much on the phrase, you feed them, is because I feel like there's such a strong lesson here to learn that God has the way that he works. So in so many ways, the desires of how he works is often through the impossible moments, or through the improbable moments of our lives. I think about the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And as they are serving in a foreign land, as they are being, if you don't know the story, it's in Daniel. It's also a great VeggieTale called Rack, Shack, and Benny. Lots of fun, catchy songs about eating the chocolate bunny. So watch that, or read Daniel. Both are good. But basically, King Nebuchadnezzar builds an idol that he is going to have all the people of the land, that when they play the instruments and they make this noise, everybody is supposed to bow down to it. Well, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are Israelites, and they know that they can worship no other god but God, and to bow down before false idols would be idolatry, and that's against the 10 Commandments. And so they're like, well, we can't do that, and so they don't. And so this makes Nebuchadnezzar mad, and he's like, look, I'll give you one more chance. So I've got you in these high places here. I've promoted you in the government. You lack nothing. just bow down. And they don't. And so he basically says, look, you'll bow down or I'm going to throw you into the furnace. I'm gonna kill you. And the answer that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego give Nebuchadnezzar is basically they said, look, if you throw us into the furnace, our God can save us. He is totally 100% capable to do that. He has that power. He has that ability. We have faith that he can. But even if he doesn't save us, even if he chooses not to, we won't bow down to your idol. And as the story goes, Nebuchadnezzar's like heat the furnace up to hotter than it's ever been before, and the guards grab them, they bind them, and they throw them into the fire. And the guards themselves actually die from getting too close to the heat. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, in the middle of the fire, they are okay. And there's a fourth figure there, which a lot of people would say is representative of Jesus or God, and that an angel, whatever. There's lots of different theories. It's not super important which one you settle on, but just know that it represents God's presence with them. And they are untouched. And so Nebuchadnezzar says, hey, you guys come out of there. And they do. And they don't even smell like they have burnt clothes on, even though they were in the furnace. And so Nebuchadnezzar falls down and worships God. And I think that that is just a strong reminder that God works at those times when it seems the most improbable. It's the most unlikely times. God likes to work in those areas. And that's what all of, if you look at Hebrews chapter 11 and 12, it's all about faith and how God works through people's faith and all the things that he does. And we are called to have the kind of faith that expects, like Abraham. Abraham is a man of faith because God promises him that he's going to be the father of many nations, and yet he doesn't have any children, and he just continues to get older and older and older, and yet he still has no children, and so he is, he just continues to have faith, and even in the moment where God says, hey, Abraham, I want you to take your son, Isaac, up onto the mountain and sacrifice him. And this, again, was an ultimate test by God. God, I don't think, ever intended for Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, but there was this faith that the Bible says that Abraham had, that he was just like, well, if even if I had to sacrifice Isaac, God would just make him come back to life. God would do something. God was bigger than the impossibilities, and I think that is the mindset that I so think that I want to have more when I look at the world today, when I look at my life, when I look at the circumstances that I go through, is this idea that when Jesus looked at the crowd, he saw the tremendous possibilities of what God could do. But when the disciples looked at the crowd, they saw the liabilities. They saw the problems. They said, look, Jesus, we are in the wilderness and there's no food around, and we don't, even if there was, even if we could go to town and buy enough bread and buy enough fish to feed these people, we couldn't afford it. So A, we're out in the middle of nowhere, and there are no grocery stores, there are no towns to go to, there's no place to get food. And B, even if we were next to Jerusalem, even if we were next to the city of Rome, even if we were in the metropolis areas, we don't have that kind of money. We can't afford it. We couldn't afford to buy dinner for all these people. And that is something that the disciples, I mean, they weren't wrong. Like they were right. There was nothing within the resources as far as they understood them, as far as the human side goes, that they could do. There was nothing that could be done. It wasn't going to happen. It would take a miracle. That's a cliche that we have because of this idea that there are times when we're just saying that it is it takes a miracle, because we don't have the human resources, we don't have the ability to make things happen. And when we don't, we have to rely upon God. And and we don't. I think we don't like that. And I think that especially in the American culture, we very much don't want to rely upon anything. We want to be in control. We want to be the ones that have figured it all out. That we have all the things that we think how they should go, and we want to show people that we are the ones that are in charge, that are at work. And when we do that, then we often close the door to the ways that God works. And it's a balancing act. It's a balancing act because we are to be wise. This is what Jesus says. He says, "You should be as wise as serpents and innocent as doves." And so there's this balancing act where we are expectant with hope. We live with hope that God is going to move in big and mighty ways, and He's going to do things that we could never imagine, but also that we to do our part. It's not like Jesus' invitation. So when the disciples come to Jesus and they say, "Jesus, send these people away. They need to go figure out their own problems." Jesus wasn't trying to create the expectation that you didn't have to do anything. Following Jesus is not just being still and never doing anything. Being still is part of following Jesus. We should find moments where we have to meditate and think, just so that we can follow Jesus. But there's also this idea that we're called to work, to do things, that we're called to do good deeds, that we're called to do good things, that what Paul tells us is that God has actually created for us in advance, good deeds, that he has seen that he will have his followers and those that will choose to follow him, and that they have work to do, and that as long as we're alive, as long as we have breath in our body, as long as our hearts are beating, God has us here on this earth for a reason. And I think that, so it's this balancing act to know that we're not called to do everything in our own power, in our own strength, with our own resources, but we're also not called to just pretend like we'll do the least amount that we can do, and as we do that, then we'll see it, because we're like, oh well, God's just going to do it. I don't need to do anything, and that's why I think in the story you see the combination of the two things. You see Jesus saying, "You give them something to eat, you feed them," and the disciples were like, "Well, we thought you might say that, and because you said that, we want to point out that all that we have is 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish for 5,000 people." And now, it's important to point out here that we're talking about 5,000 men, because that's who they counted. They didn't count women and children, so it could have been anywhere from 5 to 15,000, could have been 10,000, could have been 7,000. We don't know how many actually filled out the whole crowd, but the point is that there was a collaboration between the resources that the disciples had, and maybe not even the disciples, but somebody in the crowd. Some in one of the Gospels, it's some young boy whose mom had packed him a lunch, basically, comes forward. But even so it's this combination of the resources that we have, the earthly resources that we have, and we bring those to Jesus. We ask for his blessing, and he blesses them, and he's able to use our resources to be able to accomplish growth for his kingdom, to be able to accomplish amazing things in the name of furthering his kingdom and in his glory. And I think that that it is that it's the balance is so hard to maintain, because we often fall into the same ideas, same trap that the disciples fell into, is that we look around and the problem is just too big. The world is too lost. We're everything's just too broken, and so there's just no hope. There's no fixing things. Like, our hope is just that one day Jesus is going to come back, and that's our only hope. And yeah, there is a hope that we have, is that Christ will return. He'll be triumphant. That we will have our eternal selves. We will. That is our hope. That is our final hope. But in the meantime, you have Jesus who's saying to us, and as he said to Peter, he's like, "You feed them. You feed my sheep. You do it." It's such an important part of following Jesus, is to know that he has given us gifts and talents and resources to bring glory to his name. And when we don't use those, or when we think that we are not good enough, or we don't have enough, or that we can't do enough, we can't do a big enough thing, then we miss out on opportunities to work in tandem with God's power and our resources. And I think one of the things, and I wrote about this in my blog, my latest blog on Patheos, about this, and I think it's still so key. One of the things that keeps us from doing anything is that we imagine all of the reasons why not. So whenever we have an idea, whenever we have a vision, and whenever we have, like, we're going to do something, and this goes very much, this is very true, I think, for creative people, that they have to, like, the people who create things and actually move beyond just having an idea and actually creating things, they have to move past this idea that the first thing we do, it feels like, as humans, when we have an idea, the first thing that we do is we begin to think about all the ways it can go wrong. We can't Jesus, we can't feed the people. There's just not enough people. There's not enough resources. What are we going to do? How would we do this? God, we're just going to, even if we started with these 5 fish and 2 loaves, what are we going to do? Feed 10 people and say, well, that's all we have? Is that even enough for us as the disciples and you, Jesus? Is that enough? It won't stretch. And then when people find out there's no food, but there's this, are they going to riot? Are we going to have this terrible situation on our hands where people are, stampeding and fighting for these resources? Or maybe just like that, so it's just this idea that as we think about, we just think about all of the things that could go wrong. And so we don't do it. For example, God is calling you to be creative in some way, to serve in some way. And the first thing almost immediately that pops into our heads whenever we think about what we might do or what we might be called to doing is what if it doesn't work? What if it doesn't work? What if it's not good? What if what I produce or what I do doesn't produce the results that I want? What if I write a sermon and nobody cares? What if I write a book? What if I write a song? What if I pray a prayer? What if I start a ministry? What if I give to church? What if I serve at a soup kitchen? What if I care for my neighbor and it just doesn't make a difference? After all, who am I? And this is what we say to ourselves. We're like, who am I? Who am I to do this thing? Who am I to think that I am nobody? Why would my prayer, why would my sermon, why would my care, why would my gift, why would my service, why would my heart be what God uses? Who am I? I'm not. Why would God choose me? And I think back to the whole story of David. I know we talked about that a lot a couple podcasts ago, but I think about that idea of as Samuel's going through David's brothers, he sees a lot of um, he sees a lot of men that have good qualities for a king in the world's eyes: big and strong, confident, rugged, and yet they weren't who God was looking for. And God says this thing. He says, "I look for the heart." And David has the heart. He has my heart. He has a heart after God. And I think so many times we look like we decide whether or not we can do something or want to do something, or we look at ourselves, and we look at the mountains, and we look at the obstacles, we look at the lack of resources, we look at all of the things, and we decide that it would fail before we even try. And so we don't try. We think we get an idea, we get God tugging in our heart, and He is saying you should go and do. And then we go, okay, but Jesus, what if it fails? But Jesus, we don't how will I feed these people? How are we going to feed the 5,000 people, God? We don't have any food, and we don't have money to buy the food, and there's not any place around here. And what do you mean? You want me? You want us to feed them? And we go, I think I misheard you. Or we go, you know what? It would be great if somebody would do that, but I don't think that person is me. And so what you have is you actually have one of the stages of creating anything, of doing anything, is that you have to get beyond. I think you have to count the cost. I mean, again, you have to be as innocent as a dove, but wise as a serpent. You have to count the cost. You can't just decide that you're just going to do whatever. If God's not in it, you're not. It's not going to happen. But if God is calling you to do something, He's just calling you to be faithful. And whether that gets the results you thought that it should, the success really is not judged in numbers. Its success is judged in how faithful you were with the resources that you have. That's why Jesus tells this whole story about this idea of the talents, and he's like, you've got a guy with 10 talents, and he went and he invested them aggressively, and he doubled what he had. And you had a guy with 5 talents, and then you got to the last guy, and the guy was like, well, I knew, Master, you were harsh, and you reaped where you didn't sow, and you had high expectations, and I was just so afraid. I didn't want to lose it, so I went and buried it in my backyard. So here is the 1 talent back. And the master in the parable is like, you foolish servant. The least you could have done is put it on the bank, and gotten interest on it, right? Like you wasted, even though you only had 1 talent, you only had this one little thing, you wasted it, and now it's taken away from you. And I think that it's easy for us to see the obstacles, to see the challenges, to see the world, and be like, well, the world is never, I'm not going to change the world, so why even start? But here's the thing. If Jesus looks at you in your heart, and He says, you feed them, whatever that thing may be, you have to get past the automatic assumption that it's going to fail. It may. I mean, the second part of Hebrews chapter 11 and 12, that like it's all about running the race and faith, but part of that is that sometimes people don't get to see what they want to see. Things don't get done. Miracles don't happen. God saves some, but then doesn't save others. Jesus Himself didn't heal everybody. And so sometimes you will be called to serve, and You won't see the fruit times 1,000 or 2 million or whatever it might be. You might just see a small change or no change at all, it seems. Sometimes we're called to love people, to care for people, and those people never respond, never change. Sometimes those people are in our families, sometimes they're coworkers, sometimes they're friends, and we love them and we pray for them and we serve them, and it seems like it doesn't ever change anything. And the deal is, if even if it doesn't, I mean, we can't know people's hearts, and so I would caution and say that it's not changing things. But even if it doesn't, our job is to be faithful. When Jesus looks at us and says, "You feed them," there's a playfulness, I think, where he's like, "You imagine, like, I know that you can see all the problems. I know that you can see all the realities that of why you can't feed them. But what if you could? What would happen? What would happen if you could? What would that look like? What would it look like for God to show up in such a big way that 2 fish and 5 loaves would feed 5,000, and there would be plenty left over?" And a lot of times we never get there when God calls, when God speaks to our hearts. We let the doubt and the reality and the lack of resources speak to our hearts, and we say, it just can't be done. But I want you to be challenged. I want you to challenge yourself. What is it that God's calling you? What resources has he given you? What place has he put you in? What person has he put you next to? And he says, you feed them. And it may not be some grand gesture or some big thing that you have to do. It may not be something that puts the world on an edge and turns the world upside down. Although I think that just loving people as God calls us to love them and living in such a way has a natural tendency to do that. But what is it? Where is it that God's saying to you, you feed them, and you take your resources and you do the best that you can, and see what God can do. You take your resources and let God bless them, and see what God can do. I think I look at the world, and I look at America, and I look at the times, and it seems at times so hard, because there's so much darkness, so many bad things are happening, so many negative things, and we fall into, it feels like we fall into the pit of just being like, well, what difference could we make? What does it matter? And yet we have to live in such a way that we're like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, where we go, all right, God, even if you don't change the world, I'm gonna go. Even if you're not gonna save me from the fire, I'm gonna serve you. Even and we go with a full expectations that he can, and he will. But we also go knowing that his ways are higher and better, and so we are called to serve, but we do not determine the course. But we take our resources and we feed those around us. And please don't hear this as just a metaphor about food, because I'm using the feeding the 5,000, but just the idea that Jesus sees where you're at. He knows your heart, he knows your circumstances, he knows your life, and he knows what he wants to accomplish through you, and his Spirit, the Holy Spirit, will speak to you, and it will call you to do things, and we will have an opportunity to respond, sometimes daily, sometimes minute by minute. But when he calls, may we imagine all the things that could be, and may we have faith and courage to live in such a way that those things can be accomplished. because God is bigger. God is better. God is more, and He can take our resources as we put them forward for Him to bless, as we share them with those around us. He takes our resources, and He does more than we could ever imagine. What are the odds? What are the odds that 5 loaves and 2 fish could feed 5,000? Pretty low. But what are the odds that God is at work and doing something even now in your heart and in the heart of those around you, in the lives of those around you, wherever you work, wherever you're at school, whether you're at church, wherever you are in your family? What are the odds that God's at work? And the answer to that is 100%. God's moving, and He's at work, and He's calling you to be a part of that. If you're a follower, He's calling you to be a part of that. So what is it that He's calling you? Where is He asking you to step out in faith, to use your resources? And when you say, God, I see this need, and He says, yeah, you feed them. I pray that you will ask God to reveal that to you, and that you will get rid of the doubts that stand in your way, and that you will encourage and strength feed those people. Feed those people who are around you. Do the thing that God calls you to do. And see how He will bless your resources.